Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Seymour, and this is the first of our lessons in government. And what we really want to look at today is the question of, are we really, truly a democracy? It's a question that has come up a lot in our current events, especially since the election of 2020. Are we a democracy? Are we, or are we some other form of government? And the answer is we're some other form of government. We're going to look at that in these lessons today. So after completing this lesson, you should be able to define and explain what a democracy is. Understand that a constitutional republic is a representative form of government whose representatives derive their authority or get their power from the consent of the governed. That's you and I, the citizens. They serve for an established tenure and are sworn to uphold the Constitution. And we are going to compare and contrast a true direct democracy, a pure democracy, if you wish to call it that, versus a republic. So I'm going to go through some slides with you and give you a few explanatory descriptions of the democracy and the republic, and then we're going to go on and do a little bit of practicing before we have our homework for the day. So what is a democracy? A democracy in the traditional Greek definition, which is where it derives, it comes from two words, demos meaning people, kratos meaning rule. So essentially what we have is rule by the people. And Webster's dictionary defines a democracy as government by the people, especially the rule of the majority. Now, this is the part that gets a little confusing because in our form of government, as we found out in 2020, and as we found out in 2016 and in several other elections since the year 2000, the guy who gets the most votes doesn't always win. Okay, in 2020, that's what happened, but in 2016, it certainly isn't what happened. So it's not whoever gets the most votes, it's a little different than that. So Webster defines a republic as a form of government in which people choose other people to represent their interests by voting. So that leads us to two forms of democracy, direct and indirect. A government where the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, which usually involves periodically held free elections, is the more intense definition of a democracy. But again, there's some parts in there that separate our form of democracy or republic versus a pure democracy, what we usually think is majority rules. Okay, so why isn't the United States a true democracy? Well, first, in the United States, the candidate with the most votes can lose for president. Remember that we have a system where the states technically choose who they want to be president. It's called the Electoral College. And that's based on the votes for each candidate in that state. Whoever wins, whichever party wins the majority of the votes, whichever candidate gets all the electoral votes in most states. So that means that you could actually have a count for the country where the electoral votes put the candidate as winning, but the actual number of votes when added together don't. And that's been a problem, especially in elections that we've had lately. And here's another one, more money, more power. For a nation to really be a pure democracy, everybody's got to be equal, and they all have to have an equal say. But that isn't quite true in the United States. We are differentiated by levels of wealth, by education, and yes, race and ethnicity do differentiate us. We all have equal opportunities, but not all of us have equal outcomes. So we're not all exactly the same on the playing field. And that's what you have to have for a pure democracy. So in our system of government, voters choose the representatives who in turn choose the voters. That's what a republic is. People voting for others to make decisions on their behalf. That's why we're a republic. So let's kind of review the two terms, see if we can get an understanding of the differences. A democracy means rule by the people. In a direct democracy or an Athenian democracy, because it goes back to Athens, Greece, everyone participates directly in every decision. But there's a problem with that. As a country grows, it becomes impractical for 360 million people to make a decision all at the same time. It's not going to happen. And so that's why we have the indirect democracy or representative democracy, or what we call a republic, which is based on representatives. We vote on people who represent us, and those people vote in our behalf. So the United States officially is a constitutional republic. That is a representative form of government whose representatives get their authority from the consent of the governed, serve for a set amount of time, and are sworn to uphold the Constitution. What makes the two forms of democracy similar, the reason they overlap, is because a democracy's common thread is the participation of the citizen. In a republic, you have the participation of the citizen by way of voting, even though they are represented by others. And then in a pure democracy, everybody gets involved. So let's go to a little bit further and let's see if we can tell the difference between them. Here's one example. Is this a democracy? The United Kingdom, Great Britain, has a long history of kings and queens going back more than 1,200 years. These rulers are still considered to be the head of state, and they get their power by birth. But they also have an elected group of representatives that make laws. This group of representatives is known as a parliament, who are chosen by the people. Is this a democracy? Well, yes, because people are involved and they have a say in their government. Now, it also has shades of a republic because the people vote for representatives in parliament, and parliament will in turn vote for who becomes their prime minister, which is like their president. So here's a second one. You have a knitting club. A knitting club meets online every month. They make their decisions by allowing everyone who's in the meeting at the time to click on a button on their screens, and whichever either decision or candidate or whatever they're voting on gets a majority vote, more votes than anyone else, that's adopted into the rules, or that person is elected into office. Only people who are participating in a meeting are allowed to vote. Is this a direct democracy? And the answer would be yes, it's a direct democracy. Is it a republic? We'll look at that in a minute. Yes, it's a direct democracy. All right. The United States selects a new leader, the president, every 4 years. The decision as to who becomes president can be a little confusing because each state selects a group of people to vote on their behalf based on which candidate got a majority of the votes in that state. That's the Electoral College. So again, you can have more votes for someone when they add it all together, and then still that person doesn't become president because you have electoral votes. All right, but also in the United States, we vote on members of Congress directly every 2 years. So that still makes us a democracy. Are we a democracy? Of course we are. But we're more than that. And that's the important part here. It's not an either or situation. It's an overlap of the two. All right. So let's ask if this is a republic now. The United Kingdom has a long history of kings and queens going back 1,200 years. The rulers are still considered to be the head of state. They get their office by way of birth. But they also have an elected group of representatives that makes laws. We call that the parliament. Those people are chosen by the voters. So is this a republic? Yes, it is. It is a republic because we're voting on people to represent us. The Knitting Club. Let's go back to that example. The Knitting Club of Texas meets online every month. Decisions are made by allowing everyone in a meeting to click on a button in their screens, and whoever gets the majority vote wins, or that decision is made. Only people who are participating in the meeting are allowed to vote. So is this a republic? The answer is no, because you have direct participation of the citizen. So it's a pure democracy. All right, the United States selects a new leader every 4 years. The decision as to who becomes president can be a little confusing. Each state selects a group of people to vote on their behalf based on which candidate got a majority vote in that state. Members of the House of Representatives are selected through a direct election of the people, but must follow and defend the Constitution. Is this a republic? Of course it is. It's a constitutional republic, which is our form of government. All right, so we've reviewed a little bit. Let's do some homework. So let me explain what we're going to do for homework. We're going to take some resources that I've given you, and we're going to look up a national newspaper. It could be the New York Times, Washington Post, El Paso Times, Dallas Times Herald. It doesn't matter, but it should be a pretty major newspaper. And what I want you to do is find an article that shows why we are a republic in the United States. Give me an example of something going on right now that demonstrates why we are a republic. So I'm going to take a look at this. You're going to write 2 or 3 sentences describing the article and 2 or 3 sentences describing why this is an example of a republic. So it's about 2 paragraphs altogether. And I'm going to look at your work based on your research. Have you researched your topic? I'm going to ask you to briefly explain the article in 2 to 3 well-constructed sentences. So I'd like you to pay attention to your grammar, spelling, and punctuation. And I want you to briefly explain how the article demonstrates and relates to a republic. So we want to see the connection there. There are some resources. I'm going to post those resources up for students, but there's also a QR code on those resources, so you can use your phone and actually look up the resource and go there on your phone or the computer. And we've got one for the newspapers that I suggest, and another one basically takes you to a series of grammar help articles, videos, and so forth to help you with your grammar if you're having problems with your writing, or if you want to know what to do as far as your writing requirements. And of course, I'm always available to you. So the way that I'm collecting data here is the we do examples. Of course, if I'm going to have students on the line, I'm going to give them a time to say yes or no, thumbs up, whatever. And then we have our current events article assignment, where I'm going to actually take a look at that writing and see if they truly can explain why that article that they chose shows that we are a republic. And then we can make connections later on with that article and what's happening in terms of current events. So the examples then are going to allow the student to explain why and how each is a democracy or republic. And then the main thing is we want to look at, see why republics are unique. While democracies and republics overlap, we say that the United States is not a true democracy, but it gets very confusing, especially when we get to the Electoral College. Okay. Thank you very much for watching this.